The moment I saw her walk out the door, her suitcase wheels scraping against the hardwood floor of our modest apartment, my heart shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. I stood frozen, my hands trembling, the weight of my own lies pressing down on me like a collapsing skyscraper. Emily's eyes, those soft hazel pools I'd drowned in for 2 years, were red-rimmed and cold, her lips pressed into a thin line of betrayal. She didn't say a word as she left, didn't need to, her silence screamed louder than any argument we'd ever had. I wanted to run after her, to beg, to explain, but my feet were cemented to the floor, my voice choked by the truth I'd hidden for too long. I was no ordinary man, no humble mechanic scraping by on a blue-collar paycheck. I was Ethan Caldwell, billionaire heir to a tech empire, and I'd built our love on a foundation of deceit. It started as a desperate escape. At 35, I was suffocating under the weight of my own wealth. The private jets, the penthouses, the endless parade of people who saw dollar signs instead of a person, it was a gilded cage, and I hated it. Women threw themselves at me, their smiles calculated, their affection transactional. I wanted something real, something untainted by my fortune. So, I ran. I left behind the boardrooms and the bodyguards, traded my tailored suits for flannel shirts and work boots, and became Ethan Carter, a mechanic in a small town in upstate New York. I rented a one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint, drove a beat-up truck, and worked at Joe's auto shop, where the smell of motor oil and burnt coffee clung to everything. It was freedom, or at least the closest I'd ever come to it. That's where I met Emily. She was a barista at the coffee shop across the street, her apron always dusted with flour, her laugh bright enough to cut through the grayest mornings. She was 28, with a quick wit and a warmth that made my chest ache. The first time I saw her, she was juggling 3 orders, her hair falling out of its messy bun, cursing under her breath when a latte spilled. I was smitten before I even knew her name. I started going to the shop every day, not for the coffee, God knows it was terrible, but for her. She'd tease me about my black coffee order, call me Mr. Predictable, and I'd grin like an idiot, my heart pounding like I was a teenager again. I asked her out after a month, and when she said yes, it felt like I'd won the lottery, not the billion-dollar inheritance I was hiding. We fell fast and hard. Emily was everything I'd dreamed of, fiercely independent, kind to a fault, with a stubborn streak that made her impossible to argue with. She'd grown up in foster care, fought her way through community college, and carried a quiet strength that made my own struggles feel small. I loved her stories, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about her dream of opening her own bakery, the way she'd hum off-key while cooking dinner in our cramped kitchen. Our life together was simple, but it was ours. We'd spend evenings on the couch, her feet in my lap, watching old movies or arguing over who made better pancakes. I'd fix her car when it broke down, and she'd sneak free muffins into my lunch bag. It was perfect, until it wasn't. I told myself I'd tell her the truth eventually. I'd planned it out 100 times in my head, I'd sit her down, confess who I really was, and she'd be shocked but understand. She'd see that my lie was born of love, not malice. But every time I tried, the words stuck in my throat. What if she looked at me differently? What if she saw the money instead of me? So, I kept quiet, burying the truth deeper with every "I love you," every shared dream of a future together. I proposed 6 months ago, on a snowy night by the lake, with a ring I'd bought with my mechanic's wages, not too flashy, but enough to make her cry when she said yes. We were planning a small wedding, just us and a few friends, and I swore I'd tell her before the big day. But I waited too long. Last night, everything unraveled. I'd come home late from the shop, my hands still greasy, my coveralls stained. Emily was waiting in the living room, her arms crossed, a laptop open on the coffee table. My heart stopped when I saw the screen, a news article from some gossip rag, my face plastered across it, the headline screaming, "Tech tycoon Ethan Caldwell living double life in small-town America." Someone had recognized me, maybe a customer at the shop, maybe a reporter sniffing around. It didn't matter. The truth was out, and Emily's eyes were a storm of hurt and rage. "You lied to me," she said, her voice low and trembling. 2 years, Ethan. 2 years, and you couldn't tell me who you really are. I tried to explain, stumbling over my words, but every sentence sounded like an excuse. She didn't yell, didn't cry, just stared at me like I was a stranger. "I loved you," she whispered, and that was worse than any scream. She packed a bag, her movements mechanical, and walked out. The door clicked shut, and I was alone, the weight of my deception heavier than any fortune. Now, I'm standing in our empty apartment, the silence deafening. Her favorite mug sits on the counter, half full of cold tea. Her scarf is still draped over the couch, the one she wore on our first date. I want to believe she'll come back, that she'll give me a chance to make this right, but the look in her eyes haunts me. I've lost her, and it's my own fault. I sink onto the couch, my head in my hands, and wonder how I let it come to this. Did I ruin everything by trying to protect what we had? Or was it doomed from the start, built on a lie I thought I could outrun? I don't know how to fix this, or if I even can. But as I sit here, surrounded by the ghosts of our life together, one thought burns brighter than the rest: I have to try. I have to find her, to face the truth I've been hiding from, even if it means losing her forever. Because if I don't, I'll never forgive myself, and neither will she. The days after Emily left blur into a haze of regret and self-loathing, but let me take you back to before the truth exploded, to the months when our life together seemed perfect, yet the cracks were already forming beneath the surface. Living as Ethan Carter, the mechanic, was my sanctuary, a carefully constructed lie that let me breathe for the first time in years. I'd wake up at 6, pull on my worn flannel and jeans, and head to Joe's auto shop, where the hum of engines and the clank of tools drowned out the echoes of my real life. Emily would already be gone, her early shift at the coffee shop starting before dawn, but she'd leave a post-it note on the fridge: "Don't forget to eat, grease monkey. Love you." And I'd smile, tucking it into my pocket like a talisman. Our life was simple, predictable, and I thought it was enough. But looking back, I see the moments I missed, the subtle signs that my deception was already poisoning what we had. Our apartment was small, a third-floor walk-up with creaky floors and a view of the alley behind the diner. It was nothing like the Manhattan penthouse I'd left behind, with its marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, but I loved it because it was ours. Emily had made it home, hanging fairy lights over the couch, stacking books on every surface, and filling the air with the scent of her baking experiments. We'd cook dinner together most nights, her chopping vegetables while I stirred sauce, our elbows bumping in the tiny kitchen. She'd laugh when I burned the garlic, and I'd tease her about her obsession with cinnamon in everything. "You're gonna turn me into a snickerdoodle," I'd say, and she'd swat me with a dish towel, her eyes sparkling. Those moments felt like they could last forever, but I was too caught up in the fantasy to notice the tension creeping in. Emily was perceptive, too perceptive sometimes. She'd ask questions I didn't know how to answer, her tone light but her eyes searching. "How come you never talk about your family?" she'd say over breakfast, her fork pausing midair. I'd shrug, mumble something about a rough childhood, and change the subject. My parents were alive, wealthy, and distant, running their empire from a Connecticut estate, but I couldn't tell her that. Instead, I spun vague stories about a dad who worked construction and a mom who left when I was young, half-truths that felt like betrayal every time I spoke them. She'd nod, but I could see the flicker of doubt in her expression, like she was piecing together a puzzle I didn't want her to solve. Then there were the practical lies, the ones that piled up like unpaid bills. I'd get calls from my assistant, Claire, who managed my real life from a distance. I'd step outside, pretending it was a customer from the shop, but Emily would notice the way I lowered my voice, the way I'd hang up quickly when she came near. "Work stuff," I'd say, and she'd smile tightly, like she didn't quite believe me. Once, she found a receipt in my jacket for a $200 dinner in the city, from a night I'd told her I was working late. I said it was a mistake, that I'd grabbed the wrong receipt at the shop, but her silence afterward was heavy, her eyes lingering on me like she was waiting for me to crack. I hated myself for it, but I couldn't stop. The truth felt like a grenade, and I wasn't ready to pull the pin. At the shop, I was careful, but not careful enough. Joe, my boss, was a gruff man in his 50s, more interested in cars than conversation, but even he started to notice things. "You don't add up, Carter," he said one day, wiping his hands on a rag. "You know too much for some drifter mechanic. Where'd you learn all the tech stuff?" I laughed it off, said I'd picked it up from YouTube, but his raised eyebrow told me he wasn't buying it. The other guys at the shop, Mike, a loudmouth with a bad tattoo, and Sam, a quiet kid fresh out of high school, didn't care much, but I caught them watching me sometimes, like I was a puzzle they couldn't solve. I kept my head down, focused on the work, but the pressure of my double life was starting to wear me thin. Emily's best friend, Tara, was another complication. She was a nurse, blunt and fiercely protective, with a laugh that could fill a room. She liked me, or at least I thought she did, but she had a way of asking questions that cut too close. "You're too good to be true, Ethan," she said once, half joking, at a barbecue in her backyard. "What's the catch?" I grinned, said something about my bad cooking, but her eyes lingered, like she could smell the lie on me. Emily laughed it off, but I could tell it stuck with her. She started watching me more closely, noticing the way I'd tense. The air in our apartment grew heavier in the months before Emily walked out, like a storm gathering strength just beyond the horizon. I was still Ethan Carter, the mechanic with grease-stained hands and a simple life, but the mask I'd worn for 2 years was slipping, and I could feel it. Emily's glances lingered longer, her questions sharper, and every moment we spent together felt like a tightrope walk over a chasm of my own making. I wanted to believe we could keep going, that love would outweigh my lies, but suspicion was creeping into her heart, and it was tearing me apart. My mornings at Joe's auto shop and her shifts at the coffee shop were the same, but the space between us was filling with unspoken questions, and I was running out of ways to dodge them. Emily had always been intuitive, her hazel eyes catching details others missed. She'd noticed the way I'd flinch when my phone buzzed with a call from Claire, my assistant, who was juggling my real life as Ethan Caldwell, billionaire tech mogul. I'd step onto the fire escape to take the call, muttering about a client or parts order, but Emily's silence when I came back inside was louder than any accusation. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching some old rom-com, her head resting on my shoulder, she suddenly asked, "Why don't you ever talk about your past, Ethan? Like, really talk?" Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, like she was testing the waters. I froze, my hand pausing on her hair. "Not much to tell," I said, forcing a laugh. "Just a boring kid from nowhere." She didn't laugh back, just looked at me, her eyes searching for something I wasn't ready to give. "Everyone's got a story," she said quietly, and turned back to the TV. The moment passed, but it left a knot in my chest that wouldn't loosen. There were other signs, small but sharp, like splinters under my skin. Emily started checking my phone when she thought I wasn't looking, not out of malice, but curiosity, like she was trying to solve a puzzle. I'd catch her glancing at the screen when a text came through, her brow furrowing at the cryptic messages from Claire about board meetings or asset transfers that I hadn't deleted fast enough. I'd laugh it off, say it was spam or a wrong number, but her smiles grew tighter, her trust eroding with every deflection. Once, she found a monogrammed pen in my jacket pocket, engraved with EC in elegant script, a careless leftover from a meeting I'd sneaked off to in the city. "Fancy for a mechanic," she said, holding it up with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. I mumbled something about a customer leaving it at the shop, but the lie tasted bitter, and her silence afterward was worse. At the coffee shop, her coworker Jess started dropping hints that made my stomach churn. Jess was a bubbly 20-something with a knack for gossip, and she'd taken to teasing me when I came in for my usual black coffee. "You sure you're not some secret agent, Ethan?" she'd say, winking as she handed me my cup. "You've got that mysterious vibe." Emily would laugh, but it was forced, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. Jess didn't know anything, not really, but her jokes hit too close to home, and I started to wonder if someone in town was talking. The shop was a hub for local chatter, and I'd seen a few customers glance at me oddly, like they were trying to place me. Had I slipped up? Let something show. The paranoia was eating at me, but I couldn't stop now, I was in too deep. Tara, Emily's best friend, was another thorn in my side. She'd always been protective, but her protectiveness was turning into suspicion. At a diner one night, the three of us crammed into a booth with sticky vinyl seats. Tara fixed me with a look over her milkshake. "You ever gonna let us meet your friends, Ethan?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Or are you just a lone wolf?" Emily nudged her, embarrassed, but Tara didn't back down. I grinned, said something about being a boring guy with no one worth introducing, but the air felt charged, like Tara was waiting for me to trip over my own lies. Later, as we walked home, Emily slipped her hand into mine, but it felt different, tentative, like she was holding on to something she wasn't sure was real. My double life was bleeding into everything. At the shop, Joe started asking more questions, his gruff voice tinged with curiosity. "You're too good with numbers, Carter," he said one afternoon, leaning against a toolbox. "You sure you didn't go to some fancy school?" I laughed, said I'd always been good with math, but his eyes narrowed, like he was seeing through me. Mike, the loudmouth mechanic, overheard and chimed in, "Yeah, man, you talk like one of those city suits sometimes." I brushed it off, but my heart was pounding. I'd been careful, kept my vocabulary simple, my stories vague, but I couldn't erase the habits of my real life entirely. The way I analyzed problems, the way I'd slip into corporate jargon when I wasn't thinking, it was all starting to show. The worst moments were the quiet ones, when Emily and I were alone, and I could feel the distance growing. One night, she came home late from a double shift, her apron still dusted with flour, and collapsed onto the couch. I brought her a glass of water, sat beside her, and tried to pull her close, but she stiffened, just for a second, before relaxing into me. "You okay?" I asked, my voice soft. She nodded, but her eyes were distant, like she was looking at a stranger. "Just tired," she said, but there was something else, something unspoken. I wanted to tell her everything right then, to rip off the mask and beg her to understand, but fear stopped me. What if she hated me? What if she saw the money and not the men who loved her? So I stayed silent, and the gap between us widened. I started having nightmares, vivid and suffocating. In one, I was standing in our apartment, but it was my penthouse instead, all glass and steel, and Emily was there, staring at me like I was a ghost. "Who are you?" she kept asking, her voice echoing, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, her steady breathing beside me a reminder of what I stood to lose. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep this up. The truth was a weight I carried everywhere, heavier with each passing day, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it crushed us both. By the time summer rolled around, Emily was quieter, more withdrawn. She still smiled, still kissed me good night, but there was a hesitancy in her touch, a question in her eyes that she didn't voice. I told myself I'd tell her soon, maybe after the wedding we were planning for next spring. I'd take her to the lake, the place where I'd proposed, and lay it all bare. But deep down, I knew I was stalling, clinging to the illusion of our perfect life. And then, one humid August evening, as I walked home from the shop, I saw a man in a suit outside our building, his camera flashing as he snapped a photo of the street. My blood ran cold. Someone had found me. The truth was closing in, and I didn't know how to outrun it, or if I even could. The moment I stepped into our apartment that August evening, the air felt wrong, like the stillness before a thunderstorm breaks. Emily was sitting on the couch, her posture rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The laptop on the coffee table glowed with a news article, its headline a knife to my chest, "Tech tycoon Ethan Caldwell living double life in small-town America." My face stared back at me from the screen, a grainy photo from some gala I'd attended years ago, my real life exposed in garish pixels. Emily's eyes met mine, and they were a storm of hurt, betrayal, and something worse, disappointment. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. The truth I'd buried for 2 years had clawed its way out, and there was no escaping it now. "How long were you going to keep this from me?" Emily's voice was low, trembling with a fury she was barely holding back. She stood, her arms crossed, her hazel eyes boring into me like she was seeing me for the first time. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her close and make this right, but the space between us felt like a chasm I couldn't cross. "Ethan Caldwell," she said, spitting my real name like it was poison. "Billionaire. Tech genius. And I'm what? Some experiment. Some game you played to feel normal." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible, each one a reminder of the lie I'd let fester. "It wasn't a game," I said, my voice hoarse, desperate. "I love you, Emily. I've always loved you. I wanted you to love me for me, not the money, not the name." I took a step toward her, but she flinched, and it was like a punch to the gut. I stopped, my hands raised, pleading. "I was going to tell you. I swear. I didn't know how." The excuse sounded pathetic even to me, and her laugh, sharp, bitter, confirmed it. "You didn't know how," she repeated, her voice rising. 2 years, Ethan. 2 years of dates, of promises, of planning a life together. You proposed to me." She gestured to the ring on her finger, the one I'd bought with my fake mechanic's wages, and her eyes filled with tears. "Was any of it real? Or was I just some small-town girl you could play house with until you got bored?" Her words were a blade, slicing through every defense I'd built. I wanted to tell her she was everything, that she was the only real thing in my life, but the weight of my deception choked me. I never meant to hurt you, I said, my voice breaking. I left that life behind because it was empty. The money, the status, it didn't mean anything. Then I met you, and you were everything I'd been searching for. I was afraid if I told you, you'd see me differently. You'd see the billionaire, not the man who loves you. I was rambling now, my words tumbling out in a desperate bid to make her understand. But her face was a mask of pain, her jaw tight, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. You think this is about the money, she said, her voice shaking. I don't care about your bank account, Ethan. I cared about you. I trusted you. I told you things I've never told anyone, about my childhood, my fears, my dreams. And you couldn't even tell me your real name. She paused, her breath hitching, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know who you are. Those words broke something in me, something I didn't know could break. I sank onto the arm of the couch, my legs unsteady, my chest tight. You know me, I said, my voice raw. You know the way I laugh at your terrible puns, the way I burn toast every morning, the way I hold you when you're scared. That's me, Emily. That's real. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't enough. The foundation of our love was built on a lie, and no amount of truth could shore it up now. She turned away, her shoulders trembling, and I saw her swipe at her eyes. I need to know everything, she said, her voice steadier now, but cold. No more lies. Who are you, really? And how did this, she gestured at the laptop, happen? I took a deep breath, my mind racing. This was my chance, maybe my only chance, to lay it all bare. So I told her. I told her about growing up in a mansion that felt like a museum, about parents who loved their empire more than their son. I told her about the tech company I'd built from nothing, the billions that came with it, the way it turned people into vultures circling for scraps. I told her about the women who saw my wealth before they saw me, the loneliness that drove me to run, to become Ethan Carter, the mechanic who could start over. I told her about Claire, my assistant, who kept my real life at bay, about the calls I took in secret, the meetings I slipped away to when I said I was working late. And I told her about the moment I saw her in the coffee shop, flour on her apron, her laugh cutting through my defenses, and how I knew I'd do anything to keep her. She listened, her face unreadable, her arms still crossed like a shield. When I finished, the silence was deafening. I waited, my heart pounding, hoping for a sign, anger, tears, anything, but she just stood there, staring at the floor. You could have told me, she said finally, her voice so soft I barely heard it. Anytime. I would have understood. But you chose to lie, every single day. She looked up, and her eyes were a mirror of my own guilt. You made me fall in love with a ghost. Emily, please, I said, standing now, my voice desperate. I'll do anything. I'll give it all up, the money, the company, everything. Just don't walk away. But she was already moving, grabbing her suitcase from the closet, her movements mechanical. I need time, she said, not looking at me. I need to figure out what's real. She packed quickly, clothes, her favorite book, the scarf she'd worn on our first date, and I stood there, helpless, watching the life we'd built unravel. Emily, don't go, I said, my voice cracking. We can fix this. I love you. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob, and for a moment, I thought she'd turn back. But she didn't. I loved Ethan Carter, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know Ethan Caldwell. The door clicked shut behind her, and the sound echoed in my chest like a gunshot. I stood there, alone in the apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of our life together, her mug on the counter, her shoes by the door. The laptop still glowed with that damning article, and I wanted to smash it, to erase the truth that had ruined everything. But the truth wasn't the enemy, I was. I'd lied to the woman I loved, and now she was gone. As I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands, one question burned through the haze of my grief: could I ever make this right, or had I lost her forever? The silence in our apartment after Emily left was a living thing, pressing against my skin, filling my lungs with every breath. Her suitcase was gone, her scarf no longer draped over the couch, and the absence of her presence was a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I stood in the doorway for what felt like hours, staring at the spot where she'd disappeared, willing her to come back, to give me a chance to fix the mess I'd made. But the hallway stayed empty, the street outside quiet except for the hum of a distant car. I was Ethan Caldwell, billionaire, liar, and now, utterly alone. The life I'd built as Ethan Carter, the mechanic who loved a barista named Emily, was in ruins, and I had no one to blame but myself. The first few days were a blur of desperation and denial. I called her phone, over and over, until it went straight to voicemail, her cheerful greeting a cruel reminder of what I'd lost. "Hey, it's Emily. Leave a message, and I'll get back to you, unless you're selling something, then good luck." I left messages anyway, my voice raw, pleading for her to talk to me, to let me explain again, but she never called back. I went to the coffee shop, hoping to catch her on a shift, but Jess, her co-worker, met me at the counter with a pitying look. "She's not here, Ethan," she said, her voice soft but firm. "She took some time off." The words were a punch, and I stumbled out, the bell above the door jingling like a mocking laugh. The news article had spread like wildfire, small-town gossip amplified by the internet's insatiable hunger. By the next morning, my double life was the talk of the town. At Joe's auto shop, the guys stared at me like I was a stranger. Mike, the loudmouth, slapped a printout of the article on the workbench. "You're some big-shot billionaire." "What the hell, man?" Joe just shook his head, his gruff voice heavy with disappointment. "Should have told us, Carter, or whatever your name is." I tried to explain, but the words felt hollow, and I left early, unable to face their judgment. The shop, my refuge, was tainted now, just like everything else. I stayed in the apartment, surrounded by Emily's absence. Her favorite mug sat on the counter, a chip in the handle from when she'd dropped it last winter. Her books were still stacked on the shelf, dog-eared paperbacks she'd read aloud to me on lazy Sundays. I couldn't bring myself to touch them, afraid they'd crumble under the weight of my guilt. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, just paced the creaky floors, replaying that final confrontation. Her words echoed in my head, "I don't know who you are." I'd wanted to protect her from my world, from the vultures and the spotlight, but all I'd done was break her trust. The irony was bitter. I'd run from my billionaire life to find something real, and now I'd lost the only real thing I'd ever had. Tara, Emily's best friend, was the only one who reached out, but it wasn't to comfort me. She showed up at the apartment 3 days after Emily left, her nurse's scrubs wrinkled, her eyes blazing. "You're an idiot," she said, pushing past me into the living room. "You had her, Ethan. She loved you, and you lied to her face every day." I didn't argue, didn't have the energy. I just sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Tara hesitated, her anger softening for a moment. "She's staying with me." She's a mess, Ethan. She doesn't know what to believe anymore." I begged Tara to tell her I was sorry, that I'd do anything, but she shook her head. "You don't get it. This isn't about apologies. You broke her." She left without another word, and the door's slam felt final, like a judge's gavel. The scandal wasn't just local. My phone buzzed with notifications, reporters, old business associates, even my parents, who I hadn't spoken to in years. Claire, my assistant, was in damage control mode, fielding calls from tabloids and investors, but I told her to let it burn. I didn't care about the company, the stock prices, the headlines. All I cared about was Emily, and she was gone. I tried to imagine where she was, what she was thinking. Was she crying at Tara's, staring at the ring I'd given her, wondering if any of it was real? Or was she angry, tearing me apart in her mind, hating me for the life I'd hidden? The not knowing was torture, worse than any boardroom crisis I'd ever faced. I started avoiding the town, the curious stares, the whispers behind my back. The diner, the coffee shop, the park where Emily and I used to walk, they were all haunted now, filled with memories I couldn't escape. I stayed inside, the apartment a prison of my own making, and drank too much coffee, pacing until the floorboards groaned. I thought about leaving, going back to my real life, but the thought of the penthouse, the suits, the endless meetings, it made me sick. That life was a lie too, just a different kind. At least here, I'd had her, even if it was built on sand. One night, I found a note she'd left in a kitchen drawer, a grocery list in her looping handwriting: milk, eggs, cinnamon, Ethan's gross protein bars. I laughed, then cried, the paper crumpling in my hand. I wanted to call her again, to drive to Tara's and beg, but I knew it wouldn't help. She needed space, and I had to give it to her, even if it killed me. But the waiting was agony, each day stretching into eternity, each night filled with dreams of her walking away. Then, a week after she left, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. My heart leapt, thinking it was her, but the message was cold, clinical. Mr. Caldwell, we need to talk. Meet me at the diner tomorrow, 10 a.m., L. Bennett. I didn't know any L. Bennett, but the name sounded like trouble, maybe a reporter, maybe someone from my past life sniffing around. I almost ignored it, but something told me I had to go. If it was about Emily, if there was any chance it could lead me back to her, I had to take it. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was this a trap? A chance at redemption? Or just another nail in the coffin of my mistakes? As dawn broke, painting the apartment in gray light, I made a decision. I'd go to the diner, face whatever was coming, and fight for the truth, my truth, the one I should have told Emily from the start. But as I pulled on my jacket, the weight of her absence heavier than ever, I couldn't shake the fear that this meeting would only deepen the chasm between us, and I'd be left grasping at shadows. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and fryer grease, the same as it always had, but as I slid into a booth at 10 a.m., my stomach churned with something heavier than hunger. The text from L. Bennett had kept me up all night, my mind spinning with possibilities, reporter, lawyer, someone from my past life come to drag me back. I'd lost Emily, my sanctuary as Ethan Carter, and now I was bracing for another blow. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag reading Doris, poured me a coffee without asking, and I gripped the mug like a lifeline, waiting for whoever this L. Bennett was to show. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I was done running from the truth. If this was a chance to fix things, or at least understand how badly I'd broken them, I had to take it. The bell above the door jingled, and a woman walked in, mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air. She wore a navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, and carried a leather portfolio that screamed professional. She spotted me immediately, her gaze locking onto me like a missile. "Ethan Caldwell," she asked, sliding into the booth across from me. I nodded, my throat dry. "I'm Laura Bennett," she said, her voice crisp. "I'm a private investigator. Emily hired me." My heart stopped, the coffee mug nearly slipping from my hands. Emily. This was about her. I leaned forward, desperate for any scrap of news, but Laura's expression was unreadable, a wall of cool professionalism. "She didn't hire me to find you," Laura continued, cutting off my hope before it could take root. "She hired me to find out who you really are. She wanted answers, about your life, your lies, everything." Her words were a knife, twisting in the wound of my guilt. Emily hadn't come to me herself, she'd sent a stranger to dig through my past, and I couldn't blame her. "I'm the one who tipped off the press," Laura said, her tone matter-of-fact. "I found the paper trail, your company, your accounts, your real name. Emily deserved to know. I wanted to hate her, to rage at her for blowing up my life, but all I felt was shame. She was right. Emily deserved the truth, and I'd been too much of a coward to give it to her." Laura opened her portfolio, pulling out a thin folder. "Emily doesn't want to see you," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "But she asked me to give you this." She slid a letter across the table, the envelope marked with Emily's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I took it, the paper feeling heavier than it should. "I'm not here to negotiate," Laura added. "I'm just the messenger. Read it, and respect her wishes." She stood, leaving me with the letter and a warning glance that said she'd be watching. The bell jingled as she left, and I was alone again, the letter burning in my hands. I didn't open it right away. I sat there, staring at Emily's handwriting, my mind racing with what it might say. Was it a goodbye? A plea? A final condemnation? When I finally tore it open, her words hit me like a wave, each sentence a mix of pain and clarity that broke my heart all over again. "Ethan," it began, "I loved you. I loved the men who fixed my car, who laughed at my terrible jokes, who held me when I cried. But that man doesn't exist. You made him up, and I don't know how to forgive that. I need time, maybe forever, to figure out who I am without your lies. Don't look for me. Don't call. If you ever loved me, let me go." The letter ended there, no signature, just a blank space where her name should have been. I read it again, then again, each word carving deeper into my chest. I left the diner in a daze, the letter folded in my pocket, its weight pulling me down with every step. The town felt alien now, the streets I'd walked with Emily tainted by my betrayal. I couldn't go back to the apartment, not yet, so I drove to the lake where I'd proposed, the place where I'd promised her a future I couldn't deliver. The water was still, reflecting the gray sky, and I sat on the shore, my boots sinking into the mud. I wanted to scream, to cry, to do something to release the pressure in my chest, but all I could do was sit there, replaying every moment I'd taken for granted. I'd thought I could outrun my past, build a new life on a foundation of lies, but I'd only built a house of cards, and now it had collapsed. Days turned into weeks, and I started to piece myself together, not because I wanted to, but because I had no choice. I quit the shop. Joe didn't argue, just wished me luck with a handshake that felt like pity. I moved out of the apartment, leaving behind Emily's mug, her books, her scent, and rented a small cabin on the edge of town. It was sparse, just a bed and a table, but it was honest, and that was something. I started running in the mornings, the burn in my lungs a distraction from the ache in my heart. I called Claire, told her to keep the company running without me for now. I wasn't ready to go back to being Ethan Caldwell, not when I was still grieving Ethan Carter. I started writing letters to Emily, not to send, but to make sense of myself. I filled pages with apologies, with memories of her laugh, her warmth, her strength. I wrote about the man I wanted to be, not the billionaire or the mechanic, but someone honest, someone worthy of her. It was therapy, in a way to face the truth I'd avoided for so long. I began to see my lie for what it was, not just a shield against my wealth, but a refusal to trust her, to believe she could love me for me. That realization was a fresh wound, but it was also a spark, a faint hope that I could change. One evening, as I sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire, my phone buzzed. It was Tara, Emily's best friend, her name a jolt to my system. "She's okay," the text read, short and to the point. "She's working at a bakery in Albany. Don't contact her, but I thought you should know." My heart leapt, then sank. She was moving on, building a life without me, and it hurt more than I could bear. But it also gave me something to hold on to. She was out there, chasing her dream, and maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to be a man she'd respect, even if she never took me back. As I watched the last light fade, a new resolve settled in my bones. I wasn't done fighting, not for her, but for myself. I'd lost her because I'd lied, but I wouldn't lose myself too. There was a long road ahead, and I didn't know where it led, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of purpose. Could I become the man I'd pretended to be, or was I chasing another illusion? The cabin's porch became my sanctuary in the months after Emily's letter, a place where I could sit with my coffee and watch the world turn without me. The crisp fall air carried the scent of pine and earth, and I'd wrap myself in a flannel blanket, staring at the horizon as if it held answers I couldn't find. It had been 4 months since Emily walked out, 4 months since my lies as Ethan Carter, the mechanic, unraveled to reveal Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire who'd broken her heart. I'd lost the woman I loved, the life I'd built, and the man I thought I was. But as the leaves turned gold and red, something shifted inside me, a quiet resolve to rebuild, not just for her, but for myself. The road to redemption was long, and I wasn't sure where it led, but I was learning to walk it, one painful step at a time. I'd stopped writing the letters I never sent, the ones filled with apologies and memories of Emily's laugh. They'd served their purpose, helping me face the truth I'd buried. My lie wasn't just about hiding my wealth, it was about hiding my fear that I wasn't enough without it. I'd thought money tainted love, but I was the one who'd tainted it, building our relationship on a foundation of deceit. That realization was a weight I carried everywhere, but it was also a compass, guiding me toward something honest. I started small, running every morning, the rhythm of my footsteps a way to quiet the noise in my head. I read books, not the business journals of my old life, but novels Emily had loved, her notes in the margins like whispers from a life I'd lost. I even started cooking, burning half my attempts but smiling at the memory of her teasing me about my terrible pancakes. The town had moved on from the scandal, the gossip fading like old newsprint. Joe, my former boss at the auto shop, called one day, his gruff voice softer than I remembered. "You're a damn fool, Carter, but you're a good mechanic. Doors open if you want it." I thanked him, but I didn't go back. The shop was part of Ethan Carter's life, and I wasn't that man anymore. I wasn't Ethan Caldwell, the billionaire, either, not fully. I was somewhere in between, trying to find a version of myself that didn't need a mask. Claire, my assistant, kept the company running, but I told her I wasn't ready to return. The boardroom felt like a foreign country, one I wasn't sure I belonged in anymore. I started volunteering at a community center in a nearby town, fixing cars for people who couldn't afford repairs. It wasn't much, but it felt real, grease under my nails, the gratitude in a single mom's eyes when her minivan roared back to life. It reminded me of why I'd run to this small town in the first place, to be useful, to be seen for what I could do, not what I owned. I didn't talk about my past, and the people there didn't ask. They called me Ethan, and that was enough. For the first time, I felt like I was building something honest, even if it was just a start. One crisp October morning, as I was hauling groceries to the cabin, I saw Tara at the market. My heart stuttered. She was the closest link I had to Emily, and the sight of her brought everything rushing back. She spotted me, her expression unreadable, and for a moment, I thought she'd walk away. But she didn't. "You look like hell," she said, her bluntness almost comforting. I laughed, a raw sound, and asked how Emily was. Tara hesitated, then sighed. "She's good. She's got her bakery job in Albany, saving up to open her own place. She's healing." The word stung, but it also gave me hope. Emily was moving forward, chasing her dream, and that was more than I could have asked for. "Do you think she'd ever talk to me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Tara's eyes softened, but she shook her head. "She's not ready, Ethan. Maybe she never will be. You hurt her deep." I nodded, swallowing the ache in my throat. "Just tell her I'm sorry," I said. "And that I'm trying to be better." Tara studied me, then gave a small nod. "I'll tell her," she said, and walked away, leaving me with a flicker of peace I hadn't felt in months. That night, I sat down with a pen and a fresh sheet of paper, not to write to Emily, but to myself. I wrote about the man I wanted to be, someone who didn't hide, who faced his fears, who loved without conditions. It wasn't a plan, not exactly, but a promise. I'd spent my life running, first from my wealth, then from the truth, and it had cost me everything. Now, I was learning to stand still, to face the mess I'd made and build something new from the ashes. A week later, a package arrived at the cabin, no return address. Inside was a small, familiar mug, the one with the chipped handle, the one Emily had left behind. There was no note, no explanation, but I knew it was from her. My hands shook as I held it, the ceramic warm against my palms, as if it carried a piece of her. Was it a goodbye? A gesture of forgiveness? Or just a way to close the chapter? I didn't know, but I set it on the kitchen counter, a reminder of what I'd lost and what I was working toward. I didn't cry, not this time. Instead, I felt a quiet strength, a determination to keep going, to prove, to myself, if no one else, that I could be more than my mistakes. The lesson wasn't clean or simple, not like in the stories Emily used to read. It was messy, raw, and unfinished. I'd learned that love isn't enough if it's built on lies, that trust is fragile and precious, and that redemption starts with facing the truth, no matter how much it hurts. I didn't know if Emily would ever forgive me, or if I'd forgive myself, but I was learning to live with that uncertainty. I was learning to be honest, not just with others, but with the men in the mirror. As winter crept closer, I started planning my next steps. I'd go back to the company, not as the untouchable billionaire, but as someone who could use his resources for good, maybe fund community programs, like the one where I volunteered, or support small businesses like the bakery Emily dreamed of. It wasn't about winning her back, it was about being the man she deserved from the start. I'd keep the cabin, a place to stay grounded, to remember who I was when the world felt too big. One evening, as snow dusted the porch, my phone buzzed with a new message. My heart leapt, hoping for Emily, but it was Claire, forwarding an email from a local charity thanking me for a donation I hadn't realized I'd inspired. I smiled, a real smile, the kind I hadn't felt in months. It was a small thing, but it was mine, a piece of the life I was building. As I looked out at the snow, the world quiet and still, I felt a spark of hope. I'd lost Emily, maybe forever, but I hadn't lost myself, not yet. And as long as I kept moving forward, there was a chance, however small, that I could find my way back to something real. But would that chance ever include her, or was I destined to carry her memory as a lesson I'd never unlearn?